What would you do if you had nothing to fear? What would you change if you had nothing to lose? What would you pursue if you didn't care what anyone else thought of you? Welcome to the Have You Seen Me Now podcast. I'm your host, Sherilyn. Have you seen me now? Have you seen me now? Greetings, stellar rock stars. Welcome to episode 4 of the Have You Seen Me Now podcast. We've been unpacking the dreams in our hearts and asking ourselves, what are those things we would pursue if we weren't afraid? If we lived our lives like we had nothing to lose, and if we actually stopped caring what other people thought of us. We've been taking time to chat with some of my inspiring friends about how it started versus how it's going with them. And today, I feel like I should do another solo episode to unpack another piece of my story with you. So, I happen to be recording this a week after Valentine's Day, and most of you probably either love it or hate it. I don't hate it. I actually love giving gifts on even the most random of days, and I'm honestly not the kind of person who needs an excuse to write a card that expresses how I feel. So a day that kind of celebrates those kind of sentimental expressions kind of fits right in with my MO. And even though I don't have a bae right now, I still enjoy the excuse to tell my friends and family that I love them. And anyone who knows me knows that I'm a wear my heart on my sleeve kind of girl. As we've talked about before, I'm a moody musician, an artsy, free spirit, a romantic, a long email writer, a texter, a card giver, a person with lots of words and thoughts that I'm not usually afraid to share. Usually. But I've been dragging my feet a little bit to record this episode, longer than I intended. I think it's mostly because I've been avoiding sharing this part of my story that I felt like I was supposed to share next. I am good at avoiding. I have mastered the art of procrastinating. However, I also work well under pressure when deadlines loom. And I had a goal of getting episode 4 out tomorrow. And so here we are. It's approaching midnight, but we're going for it. Like when I have a song submission deadline looming, I suddenly find time to finish those pesky rewrites that I've been avoiding. That might have also happened this week, this afternoon, actually. Been in the studio for hours, basically besides getting out for a walk in the sunshine for a bit, and more on that development soon. But in the midst of trying to not think about the fact that I'm 11 years post-divorce, and my unwanted singleness is still screaming ugly lies at me about not being lovable. And I realized that what happened to me when I was about 6 years old is still at the root of some of the things that loudly scream inside me on days like this and on Valentine's Day. And so I think that today is actually the perfect time to share this part of my story. So stick around, because in a few moments, I'll dive deep into a question that I think a lot of us have probably struggled with at one point or another. Am I lovable? And my hope at the end of every podcast is that you're inspired to say to all the haters in your life, and especially to your own inner critic, yeah. You might have known me back then, when I was lost and insecure, not knowing my own self-worth and believing I wasn't lovable, capable, or strong. But man, have you seen me now? This episode is brought to you by Starboard Stride, a unique boutique production company, record label, podcast service, and sync songwriters collective based in San Luis Obispo, California. Starboard Stride is focused on writing songs for the TV, ad, and film industry while developing new artists and producing broadcast quality podcasts. Visit starboardstride.com today and mention the Have You Seen Me Now podcast for 10% off podcast production or artist coaching packages. Visit today's show notes for website and details. So here we go. How it all started for me. As much as I have pondered leaving this part of my story out altogether, I just don't think I can do that. What happened that day did affect my life in a major way, though for a long time I had no clue that it did. Believe it or not, I completely repressed the memory of what happened to me for nearly 15 years. Not surprising. Hashtag I totally wish I could hug 6-year-old me. But what happened is not really the kind of thing you share in casual conversation. And I've questioned whether it's the kind of thing you share on a podcast. And yet, I have found so much healing in this area of my life. And when I've had the opportunity to share my experience, especially with young girls, it has led to healing in other hearts as well. So even if you can't relate exactly to my story today, I have learned that it may still touch a part of your heart or story where maybe you need some healing too. So I'm going to be brave and share it. And I believe that the God of the universe is the great Redeemer, and I count on that. I will say that the topic today is not particularly for younger ears. So parents, I suggest first listening with headphones or when the kiddos are out of the house or not in the car. But from a very young age, I remember doing silly things to get boys' attention. I wanted their attention, but never felt I would get it unless I acted out. This reflected itself at church on Sundays. I would actually chase my older brother's friends around in my black patent leather Mary Jane dress shoes and would kick them in the shins. Seriously. But I honestly have no real idea why. I remember them teasing me sometimes, but I suppose I likely loved the combination of letting them know I was loud and in charge, but also relished their attention somehow at the same time. I don't remember much about that fateful day, really, but here is what I do remember. My parents had some old friends over. They were pastors too. They had 2 children, both older than I. All 4 of us kids were playing in the basement while our parents were upstairs chatting and catching up. I think we were playing some form of hide and seek, maybe. I honestly have no idea why their teenage son and I were alone together in a corner and out of view from my brother and his sister behind the makeshift bar in the basement, but we were alone just long enough. I liked this older boy. I wanted him to like me, and I think even my 6-year-old self just wanted to feel loved. But my 6-year-old self had absolutely no words for what happened that day. I hid it from everyone, never telling a soul. I felt incredibly ashamed and like it was all my fault. I felt guilty that I let him do it, even though I wasn't really even sure what he had done. In the moment, I was completely frozen, like when you're having a bad dream and like something's coming out at you, but you can't move or scream, and you try to open your mouth and you shout as loud as you can, but nothing comes out. And I was screaming inside. I was terrified. I was incredibly confused. And I think the only reason he stopped was my brother was near to finding us in this game of hide and seek, thank God. I was sure something about it was very wrong. Even though it, quote unquote, felt good and I relished his attention, my 6-year-old self knew something was really wrong. And then the shame set in. The embarrassment. I felt gross, violated, but I was terrified to tell anyone what had happened. It wasn't until 15 years later, when the memory came out of hiding through some counseling in my early 20s. It was only then that I realized I had been molested. It was a devastating realization, really. I felt incredibly robbed of my childhood and innocence. And I think I can see now that I had started self-medicating, really to numb the shame and the pain by overeating. And I put on weight really to hide, because attention from guys became somewhat scary, though weirdly still desired, because we all want to be seen. I had a very strained relationship with the guys in my life over the years. After 15 years of hiding what had happened and 15 years of the tapes working overtime in my head to tell me I was disgusting and dirty and that what happened to me was all my fault, and 15 years of believing that guys were ultimately not good for me, it left a pretty messed up me hanging out to dry. I've walked through quite a bit of counseling since then, and I do feel like I've experienced a whole lot of healing, but it doesn't mean there aren't still scars. And ultimately, I know the tapes in my head love to remind me of those scars when I am at my weakest state, like on Valentine's Day, aka Singleness Awareness Day. And I often have struggled with the question, as scarred as I am I lovable? I fight to not believe the lie underneath this story that the memories taunt me with. It's all your fault. Have you guys seen the movie Good Will Hunting? Please tell me you have. Now, yes, it's full of bad language galore, so no judging. But come on, Matt Damon and Robin Williams, amazing performances and such a powerful story. During the climactic scene in that movie, the counselor Sean, played by Robin Williams, tells Will, the very troubled young man, played by Matt Damon, after many sessions of mandatory court-ordered counseling, Will, you need to know that what happened to you, it's not your fault. And Will's like, yeah, I know. And he says again, no. I need you to understand, son, it's not your fault. And Will's like, yeah, I know. He goes, no, it's not your fault. And he says this to him over and over until Will finally just breaks down in tears. And when that movie first came out and I watched that scene for the first time, I totally lost it. Like snot running down my face, kind of lost it. Because I realized, like Will, I had also believed the lie that it was all my fault for way too long. I thought that it had made me unlovable forever. Can you relate? Have there been tapes playing in your head speaking those kind of lies over you? Maybe there's something that happened in your life that's trying to place the blame on you. I believe the giver of peace wants to silence the lies in our head and remove the weight of these false accusations in our lives. But I also believe we have to be active participants in this, taking bad thoughts captive and not letting them run wild in our minds. We have to change the narrative in our own heart and thoughts. I had to change the tape to what the truth about me really is. And the truth is this: I am lovable. And so are you. Believe it. I'm learning to believe it too. Your story is not finished yet, and neither is mine. It's truly just begun. And how it's going for me now is I am learning to love myself, to enjoy my own company, to embrace my own gifts and my good sense of humor and my storytelling abilities. I have learned that I have so much to offer the world, and launching this podcast is just one tiny part. I have learned that I am abso-freaking-lutely lovable, and anyone who doesn't think so, well, it's their loss. I'm done believing the lies. I see myself in the mirror much more clearly. And therapy and counseling have definitely helped so much. Another thing that has helped is the music I create, especially at my lowest points. I find that when I share the songs I've written on those dark days, it becomes part of my healing. And in turn, the healing of others. And so I want to end today's shorter episode with this song that I wrote back then when I was truly in the thick of the mud of wondering, am I lovable? And if you're struggling today, I just want you to know you are not alone. You are not alone. But also know that you, just the way you are in this moment, battle scars, faults, failures, and all, you are abso-freaking-lutely lovable. So as you listen to this closing song today, please know that you are lovable. I'll be back next week with a special guest episode. Until then, please live loud and proud, my friends. Thanks so much for listening to the Have You Seen Me Now podcast. I'm your host, Sherilyn.
I'm gonna tell you a story about a girl you might know. She probably looks a lot like you. She nearly feels like a ghost when she passes the same face, the same places all these years. When I look in her eyes, the silence is deafening, and the loneliness it sings. Am I lovable? Am I lovable? Shattered dreams came upon her in the blink of an eye. She never thought she'd be alone. She knows the grass isn't greener, but she wondered